Welcome back to the On Life podcast. Today we are talking about liberty and how we got here. So you might be a new student, this might be your first semester, or you might have been here a while and just haven't heard this before. But we're going to take some time today just to talk about how liberty got here, how God worked through the beginning of this school and how God's still working today. So Robin, I'm really excited for this one. Who do we have?
Me too. This is a special honor we have today. Today we have with us Pastor Jonathan Falwell. He is pastor of Thomas Road Baptist Church and the Chancellor for Liberty University. So welcome.
Yeah, it's great to be with you again.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you shared that I was the first guest when you did when you started doing this podcast, and so I guess I passed because I'm asked back again. So
Yes.
that's a good thing.
Yeah,
Cool.
Absolutely. Well, we just start us off, just maybe for the online student who doesn't know you, would you just talk a little bit about who you are and how you arrived at Liberty?
Well, I kind of arrived at Liberty because I was born. I've been around here my entire life. You know, my dad, back in 1967, had the vision that God gave to him to start a Christian educational system. And so he started with Liberty Christian Academy, which is a K through 12 program that still thrives and flourishes today. And then 1971, he started Liberty University, of course, at that time, Lynchburg Baptist College, later Liberty Baptist College, now, of course, known as Liberty University. So I was born in 1966. So, my entire life has been around this place. And, I'm one of the few people kind of that had the great privilege of hanging out with my dad as he was kind of envisioning what we would do here at Liberty and what it would become. And I remember the days when, as a little child, when I couldn't care less, but yet he talked a lot about what God had laid on his heart for this place to be. And so how I got here, I had no choice whatsoever. I just happened to be born. That's it.
Perfect.
Cool. So maybe just kind of to start out, the original vision and mission that Dr. Falwell had for the school, like what does that mean to you? Do you see that still happening today?
Absolutely. Again, so I wasn't aware of it because I was a child, born in 1966, so I was, still not really paying attention at the time. But looking backwards and seeing and remembering some of the things that he talked about during those days and in the days following, clearly his vision that God, impressed upon him was to create a place that would do everything that it does in excellence. So academic excellence, athletic excellence, facility excellence, our professors who are the top-notch, the best of the best, all across the board. Everything we done with excellence. Why? Because the Bible tells us, 1 Corinthians and Colossians both tell us, like whatever you do, do as unto the Lord, whether you eat or whether you drink, do all to the glory of God. And so that is what his vision was because of what he had witnessed in the 1960s in college campuses all across America where, it was chaos and the schools were, they were burning schools down and, riots and chaos. It was everywhere. And so my dad saw what was taking place and he, again, God laid on his heart, there should be a place that could provide anything that any institution of higher learning anywhere in the world provides, but yet does it from a biblical and a Christian worldview. And he used a phrase, distinctively Christian. Now, he did that on purpose because there have been and there are lots of Christian schools that started with, Christian as part of their mission. Harvard University being one, Brown University, so many others that Yale University that started with that as being their mission. But the one thing that I think sets us apart, and again, there are some other Christian schools that would be in that same category as we are, but that distinctively Christian. In other words, it's not just name, it's like it drives everything that we do. It's why our mission statement kind of, encapsulates into that statement, training young champions for Christ, because that really is the vision that God laid upon my dad's heart, that we would do everything with excellence, but do it so that people would recognize their God-given responsibility and their God-given talent to go out and to impact this world for good and to impact this world for the gospel. So you asked the question, are we still seeing it? And the answer is absolutely yes. And I would argue that we're seeing it today as strong as we ever have been before, that there is clearly a passion and a mission from the bottom to the top and the top to the bottom at every level, from every place, that of people who desire to see that take place. If you walk on this campus, if you have the opportunity of visiting with a lot of the students or the faculty or the staff that's here, if you see the facilities that God has allowed us to have, if you watch some of the the sports games, the opportunities there, like you can see everything is done with excellence, but you would never miss out on the fact that it's all done with Christ at the center. And so is it still being seen? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great.
So it was your dad's vision, and talk about a huge vision of, wanting to build something that has gone, I would almost wonder if it went bigger than what maybe he thought, or maybe we're still getting to that bigger. But at some point, that vision, I would guess, shifted from him to you.
Well, I would actually kind of broaden that a little bit.
Okay.
I'd say that vision that God gave to him spread to a whole lot of people, a lot of individuals. It's not like I'm the only one carrying the mission.
Sure.
Like, there are so many others from every level, from every perspective. I've had the opportunity of talking with some of our facilities teams around here, some custodians that have been here for a long time, served here for 20 and 30 years, and they would say exactly what they see it as their mission. Even in what they're doing, they're seeing it as their mission to help continue the vision. And so, clearly, it was a big vision. And I don't think my dad ever had the statement that there was going to be a point when we would reach it. I think his vision was always so big, again, God-given, and so directed towards excellence and growth and expansion and really world evangelization. I don't think my dad ever would, if he could talk to us today, I don't think he would ever say, well, yeah, there was a point when I thought we would get here and then we would be done. In fact, if anyone ever said, hey, we've hit the mark, we've met the mission, mission completed, mission accomplished, I think my dad would say, stop it, because that vision continues to grow. My dad always said, is if you're still breathing, then God's still doing something through you. Right. Just in the weeks before his death, he made it very clear, preached it in a sermon. He actually said these words, that God's servant, God's man, God's woman is indestructible until he has finished the work that God has called him to do. And so clearly, until our last breath, the vision continues. And so, would my dad be surprised at where Liberty is today? No, he wouldn't, because he knew of the greatness and the goodness of our God. Yeah. He knew that God, with him, all things are possible. And so when God laid this on his heart, I remember back in those days when, he said, one day we'll have 25,000 students. And then, we started getting close to that 25,000, and he quickly started changing it. Mm-hmm. And he did it in a way like as if, I never said 25, we're going to have 50,000, and he continued to grow because he always saw that with God, all things are possible. The sky's the limit, literally. Yeah. And so, I don't think he'd be surprised at all. I think he would sit back and probably in a tongue-in-cheek way just say, I told you so. Yeah.
We have heard a lot of stories just over, especially the time that I've worked here, just about how God has just done miraculous things as Liberty has become what it is. I've even heard you share about coming to this when it was just a field with your dad. Can you maybe tell us some personal stories just of how you've seen God work here? And
so back in those early days, there was nothing here. This property that Liberty now has been built upon and has grown and expanded. A lot of people think well, man, it's always been here. It hasn't. This used to be a farm. In fact, it was a farm that was owned by, at one time, Senator Carter Glass, who was a senator from Virginia who wrote the Glass-Steagall Act, which became the Federal Reserve Act. In fact, he wrote part of that actually on our campus in his home that still is here today. But back in those days, there was nothing but the house, there was a farm, and a couple of outbuildings that were on the property, and a whole lot of cows, and a whole lot of things that cows leave behind. And so I remember as a kid coming up here in the early 1970s, mid 1970s, in that range. I was probably 7, 8, 9 years old at the time. Liberty was already underway. The earliest days, this classes met over at the old Thomas Road Baptist Church and met in hallways and stairwells and actually locker rooms and bathrooms. And, it was absolutely crazy where we started from back in those days. But Dad would come up on this property, and we would go on Saturdays. He would take me to a local hot dog place, and we would get hot dogs. It's still there, by the way. I still go there quite often. And then we would come up on the property. And again, I'm 6, 7, 8 years old, really not even knowing what we're doing. I'm just hanging out with my dad on a Saturday afternoon. And he would come up here. We would get out of the car. It was a station wagon, and we would get out, and I would just kind of play and goof around and run around the field and have a good time. I was having a great time back in those days. My dad was actually walking the property. And he was walking the property, and later he would talk about this, that he was claiming Joshua chapter 1 over the property, everywhere the soles of my feet will tread, that God will give to you. That was the statement that we find in Joshua chapter 1, and it's what Dad was claiming and asking God to provide this property. And so, it was a field, it was a farm. I've spent a lot of time riding bikes and running around this farm, and now I drive up here pretty much every day of my life, and I never ceases to amaze me what God can do with nothing. Yeah. And that's really what we've seen happen.
Yeah. So I would imagine that it wasn't like not everything went super smooth easily. Like there were probably challenges and things along the way. And maybe even since your dad has passed, there's probably been challenges. Like one of the things that we want our online students to know is that we really believe this faith journey that we're on. Would you be willing to talk about how has your faith played into dealing with challenges and maybe when things don't go the direction that we expect?
Well, when my dad was alive, I always kind of refer to my dad, he was my backstop. And so in my faith journey and my, growing up and then later, finishing college and getting my master's degree and, getting married and having children of my own, I always looked at my dad as my backstop. Like I knew that, if something went wrong, if something went drastically wrong, or I was in a corner and I didn't know how to get out at a problem that I didn't know how to face, like I knew I could pick up the phone and call my dad, and as dads do, Dad would fix it, right? Mm-hmm. And so during that time, I didn't know it until after he had passed away, but what I actually began to learn from him and saw in him during those days was actually how to navigate those things on my own. So in other words, recognizing that one day would come when my backstop wouldn't be there and, it would just be me and God. Hmm. And my dad taught me that, not like sitting me down and looking at me and saying, okay, let me teach you this. He did it by the way that he lived. You mentioned a moment ago that there were certainly some difficult times in our history here at Liberty, and that's clearly true. You go back through our 54 years of history here, and there have been some moments that were challenging. There have been some moments where, to be quite honest with you, there were some who probably believed Liberty wouldn't survive. Mm. But yet, the one thing that I learned about my dad and watched and saw in him, both publicly, but then was blessed by the opportunity of seeing him privately at home when no one else was around, is he never doubted the faith that he had in God. He never doubted God's power. He never doubted that God would bring him through, but also God would bring us through. God would bring Liberty through. And so when, some people were saying, Liberty, it's tough. I don't know if we're going to make it. My dad was like, oh yeah, it's going to be fine. And he just knew it. That confidence, which was not arrogance and it was not confidence in the level like self, it was confidence in God, is something that I learned from him, so that now, my dad's been in heaven over 18 years now, and the time that I've had, where that backstop was gone, what I've learned is you can trust God. And God is actually a better backstop than your dad is. Mm-hmm. And I've learned that. I learned it through watching him, and I've learned it now, over these last 18 years and recognizing that, you're going to walk through some difficult moments. Some of these students that we're talking to right now might walk through a class. It's a difficult class, a professor that, it's tough. I've been there. I've sat in those classes and wondering, man, if I'm going to pass, am I going to make it through? I've got this paper I've got to do, and I don't know if I'm going to have time. And what I've seen over and over and over again is that if you would simply just apply yourself in recognizing that there's nothing that you can't do when God is at your side, when God has called you to this, when this is God's will for your life, the only place you cannot fail is when you are smack dab in the middle of God's will. And recognizing that, understanding that, it's God's will for me to get this degree. It's God's will for me to serve in this position, this job. It's God's will for me to do this or that or whatever it might be. You cannot fail. If it's God's will, you're gold. And that's what you have to continue to move forward and recognize. Difficult times will come, but as Scripture very clearly tells us and teaches us that when those difficult times come, God uses those to shape us and to produce in us perseverance and patience and strength and victory. And that's what God allows us to see.
What amazing testimony of your dad showing you. The power of a dad who is walking that faith in front of us and showing you that believe these things. Like, what a great testimony. I love that.
Well, there's no doubt that I'm, I know I've been blessed and I'm biased. I had the best dad in the world, and he's my hero. Today, by the way, the day we're filming this, today's my dad's 92nd birthday.
Wow.
And, so there's no question I was given a great gift and a great dad, but not because of what he built, but because of who he was.
Who he was.
Yeah.
That's great.
We were talking before we started recording about how Thomas Road Baptist Church is also like so connected with Liberty. You had mentioned like we had started like classes there at the old Thomas Road. What's that like being in the pulpit there? Kind of following in your dad's footsteps.
Well, I don't follow his footsteps because those are big steps. And if you try to follow in somebody like that in their footsteps, when you start, you're not going to leave any of your own, right? So I don't try to fill his shoes because that's impossible. But what I do recognize is God's call. So God has called me to serve as pastor there, and it's been a great privilege and a great blessing to be able to do that, and certainly to have that history that again, I grew up there, so I've been in that church my entire life, and so it's not like I went to a new church and had to get to know the people. Like, these people watched me grow up. There are people on our staff still at Thomas Road who took care of me in the nursery.
Wow.
And now I'm their pastor.
That's cool.
Which is kind of a weird dynamic, but what a blessing to be a part of that. Yeah, the church has always been integral to what Liberty was and what Liberty is today. Dad clearly said it over and over again, and Scripture bears this out. Then in Matthew 16:18, when Jesus said, "I will build my church," he didn't put an addendum in there saying, "I will build my university." He said, "I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." My dad understood that God's plan and God's method to reach the world with the gospel of Jesus Christ was through the local church. And so the university, Liberty University, which is certainly larger now than Thomas Road, no question about that, but still anchored to Thomas Road in a very specific way, and for this very specific reason, is because we want to make sure that in everything that we do, we continue to anchor to the local church, the New Testament church, the church that God instituted through His Son Christ, that Jesus said, "I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." Acts chapter 2 clearly telling us how the church was birthed and how God began to move and to do a great work. And so Liberty serves as a training mechanism, if you will, of the local church, to come alongside the local church, not just Thomas Road, but lots of local churches, to equip individuals who come here and they might go into business, or they might go into education, or they might go into nursing, or become a lawyer, or whatever it might be. That they would recognize that when they go into that career path and whatever they choose to do, whatever God has called them to do, that they still recognize their responsibility as part of the church, the body of Christ. And so that is a clear distinction that we've always made, and it goes back to that statement, distinctively Christian, always anchored to the local church. I heard my dad say often that that a church will go the wrong direction a lot slower than a university will. And so by keeping the church and the university linked, where you cannot pull them apart, is always just one more way, one more security mechanism, if you will, to ensure that Liberty always stays connected to its original mission and vision, which ultimately is God's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we know Liberty is an educational institution, but there's also a mission in it. Training Champions for Christ, it's a ministry. Many people have come to know the Lord through just being a student here with their classes. Would you be willing, or can you think of a time of like how you've seen the ministry of Liberty University at work?
Well, what you just said clearly is an accurate statement, that so many times through our school's history, we've seen God move and God do incredible things, even during semesters where we've seen scores of students who've come to know Christ, hundreds of students who come to know Christ during their time on campus, like in a semester, whether it is through our campus community or convocation, or most likely and usually within the context of their community groups within the dorms, and those kinds of things clearly have a spiritual impact and influence on the students. I look back over our 54 years of history, and there have been just those moments, those clear moments where God moved in our student body in a powerful way. I remember years ago we had a dean at the time named Vernon Brewer, who was a dean of students and served, and the kids loved him, and he was just a great part of our team here. but he was diagnosed with cancer, and got to the point where he was so sick with cancer, the doctors took him into the operating room, and they started the surgery, and then they closed him back up and said, "There's nothing we can do," and they basically said he's going to die. And I remember that in those hours after that announcement was made, that our students gathered together, and in a 24-hour prayer time, they prayed 24 hours nonstop, all together, skipped classes, which was fine, and they got together and they just prayed for healing. That was probably 30 years ago. Vernon Brewer today continues to serve in a local mission organization, continues to travel the world reaching people with the gospel. And, what I would say is a big part of that was the power of prayer. James chapter 5 tells us that the fervent prayer of the righteous man avails much. And so it makes a difference. It's impactful. And so we've seen those kinds of moments happen where students just gather together and pray. Over the last couple of years here on our campus, we've had a number of nights where we've opened our prayer chapel to say we're going to have a 24-hour night of prayer, day of prayer. And our students will come, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, they will fill that prayer chapel praying for lots of different things, lots of different needs. And just to see that spiritual growth and that spiritual formation that is in the life of our students, this clearly is... This place is special. Yes, it's an institution of higher learning. Yes, you better write your papers, and you better show up to class and do well on those tests and all those kinds of things. But ultimately, what we're seeing here is not only an individual, a student, a boy and a girl, a man and a woman who come here to get their degree. We don't just see them get their degree and then go out. We see them get their degree and go out with a passion and a personal mission of recognizing that God has called them to something bigger than a paycheck. And that's what we continue to see, and the stories are endless of how that has played out.
So for the online student maybe watching this who maybe even hasn't been to campus yet, what words of encouragement would you have for them as they start another semester and possibly their first semester in a very long time? Maybe some anxiety there with going back to school. What kind of words of encouragement would you have for them?
Well, I would say clearly coming to this campus and just seeing it and being a part of it and connecting with the people that you might see through video or whatever is a great thing. But a lot of times they can't do that. In fact, every year at our commencement, we have a number of students who will come here to graduate, and this will be the first time they set foot on the campus. And I've met many of them, and that's a special thing for us to be able to celebrate with them. But what I would say is, regardless of whether you come to the campus or not, this is something that God is going to use in you, not only to make you better, not only to help you in your career or to help you in the journey that God has called you to, but it's actually going to strengthen your faith. And just because you're an online student, it doesn't disconnect you from the things that we've been talking about, the spiritual formation. There are so many different opportunities and so many different ways that you can allow your journey at Liberty University to also be a part of the same kind of things that a student in a dorm might experience. And really, the only thing that can stop God doing that in you is you. If you don't allow yourself the opportunity of growing in your faith while you're also growing in your knowledge, spending time in God's Word, connecting even with us, and a lot of times through campus communities, of watching them online, watching our convocations, connecting in that way. One thing I'm really excited about is we have online shepherds now that serve on our staff, that have the opportunity of connecting with our students all around the world. So when there's a prayer need, they have someone they can reach out to, either by phone or by email, and connect with them and say, listen, I've got a situation. I'm sitting out here in Dubuque, Iowa, and man, I feel alone, and I feel I really, I need someone to pray with me. And we have shepherds, team members on our staff, and their job, their responsibility is to pour into and to minister to the online students that are out there. And so, these are all things we're doing to make this more of a cohesive thing, that whether online student or whether residential student, we're students, and we're in the same team, we're in the same family, we're walking the same path, we're heading in the same direction of being champions for Christ. So regardless of where you are, no matter what city you live in, no matter what country they might live in, they are still champions for Christ, that God is using this little institution, Liberty University of Lynchburg, Virginia, to make an impact, to play a part in helping them accomplish what God has called them to accomplish. And what's really cool about God's call in our life, and regardless of who it might be, is that our call is unique. So God has called you to something, God has called you to something, God has called me to something, and God has called you to something. And whatever that is, like, only you can pull that off. Mm-hmm. Only you can do that. And so when you recognize, like, I'm the only person on the face of the earth that can actually do this that God has called me to do, recognizing the value and the importance of that, and then coming together with other people of faith like this community, this Liberty University community. Man, there's no place like it. There's no opportunity like it. God uses it in a special way. And I believe this clearly. It will change the world.
Well, that is a great way to wrap up the episode. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast again. If you, as an online student out there, are listening, maybe you have just a incredible LU story, how God has His work through your story. We would love to hear that. So there's two ways you can do it. You can either email us at onlinestudentlife@liberty.edu, or you can post on Champion Connect. And we'll put a link at the bottom of the screen here for you to join us there in our online students group, which you'll see Robin in there all the time. So if you ever want to talk to Robin, Champion Connect.
Come hang out in Champion Connect.
Cool. Well, this has been another episode of the On Life Podcast.
Living in abundance wherever God puts you.